So, Alessio, Mark, Anna, and Alex, welcome to the stage. And why don't you just take it in turns? You can each do your individual presentations, and we'll go on from there to a Q&A. And I don't choose your order. Do you want to just go along, Mark?
I think there was an order, but
there is an order, right? Alessio was actually. Okay. Alessio, let's pick on you.
Start. Good morning, everyone. My name is Alessio Dantino. I'm the co-founder and CEO of World of FoodTech. Really excited to be here today with all of you. I'm actually very humbled also to be invited to such a forum with so many renowned experts. Started my career in this space about 15 almost years ago, and I was lucky enough, I guess, to see somehow the development of the food tech movement to begin with as a group of people. Starting from the Bay Area, actually, but then moved back to Europe in 2013 and actually started my own business, which is what I'm going to tell you a little bit more about in a few seconds. Shall I? Fab. So, first off, I wanted to actually kindly invite you to embark actually on a journey with me to share a bit of what I've actually learned and seen over the last 10 years in the world of agri-food tech. You can see from this slide that effectively, you know, there have been some, I guess, sort of like highlights or, you know, big moments, as well as low heights, don't get me wrong, but I try to basically capture those with this presentation. There's quite a lot to go through, so I'm going to go very quick and pardon my speed of velocity of speaking. So first off, I guess we need to define what is food tech, right? And in 2019, we kind of tried with my organizations to do that, and because we basically felt that, you know, the one that we found on Wikipedia was very outdated. And to be honest with you, is still work in progress, as we define it as, you know, the emerging sector that effectively looks at efficiency and sustainability, and how, you know, these two elements effectively can improve our food system as a whole, so at every single step of the supply chain. But again, as I mentioned, is very much, you know, work in progress as new technologies, you know, come about, and you know, maybe the definition as a whole cannot really encompass them. And so what we tried to do at my organization is effectively trying to map out really the global ecosystem. To date, we monitor about 21,000 ecosystem actors across the globe, including, of course, you know, startup and scale-up companies, as much as, you know, investors, corporate venture capitals, accelerators, as well as what we call enablers. So the likes of the Good Food Institute or, you know, any other research center that effectively works on the future of food. And we tried to basically scope it down to 8 macro categories, which we think are indicative of the key technologies that are available in the market, both upstream and downstream. When we look at then, you know, more specifically, these are just some of the meta tags that we use as part of our proprietary taxonomy, which effectively help us to refine and filter out, you know, the different technologies and solutions that are out there based on the key sort of like technology pillars behind the solutions. But the whole story, I guess, over the last 10 years, which is what I promised, you know, I was giving you at the very beginning of this talk, is actually, I guess, you know, a cross-contamination story. And what I really found fascinating in my journey was the fact of really seeing existing technologies, which are very mature, being applied to the world of agriculture and food to basically create new use cases, right? This is the case of, for instance, you know, satellites being used and developed, you know, in the army industry, then applied to the world of agriculture, effectively allows, you know, digitizations of fields. Or, you know, the world of 3D printing, which started, of course, in the industrial, you know, space, and then got applied to the world of food. And, you know, the examples goes on and on, but effectively, again, I think it's just like the whole think of trying, you know, of applying these new technologies to a new field is what actually effectively creates innovation. And when we look at the whole, really, I guess, trend in terms of investment over the last 15 years or so, you can see that effectively we consider 2016 actually to be the year zero of food tech globally. The reason being that, as you could tell, is where the most concentration of companies, started. And when you look at, the investment trend, you could see that, 2021 was effectively when we reached the peak of investment, and then, 2022 effectively was the inflection point. But just to contextualize, I guess, this data, food tech is still a very relatively small, sector. When you look at the funding that has been invested at the global level, we're still talking about 1/3 of what has been invested in fintech, which I find it, quite surprisingly on the one end, considering that it's one of the biggest, issues that humankind, I guess, has to solve. But on the other hand, I guess, it makes sense because of the peculiarities, right, of the food and agriculture world. And so when we look at the split of funding across the different categories, and these are some of the data that come from our proprietary platform, you can see that, again, the range of solutions, is quite wide and goes from, ag tech, for instance, where there is a big concentration of companies, about almost like 30% of the whole ecosystem. Now we're mapping about 9,500 startup and scale-up companies, anywhere from pre-seed all the way to pre-IPO. And also, next generation food and drinks, which encompasses, alternative protein, soil agriculture, and the likes, accounts for another almost like 30% of the whole pack. But also it's interesting to notice that actually over the last 10 years, 56% of the investment actually went into food delivery, which is quite surprising, but on the other hand, not as much because, there are companies that need a lot of capex and a lot of, cash to effectively keep running. And so, this is why, they've been attracting, so much funding. When you look at the geographical split, you can see that there are, some leading countries, call it, in terms of number of companies that operate within these ecosystems, but also, again, distribution of funding is not equal, where you see, places like United States or China, ranking high because of the mega rounds that, have occurred to effectively fund, some of these large companies also operating in capex-intensive spaces. But, this comes also with what we call, innovation blind spots, right? As I mentioned earlier, almost 70% of the funding has gone into alternative protein, vertical farming, and food delivery, which basically has let, quite a lot of other areas, I guess, outside. And you see that, the ones that have been underfunded, things like, food safety and traceability, surplus and waste, or ag biotech, effectively represent about 18% of the ecosystem, but only got, a small percentage of the total funding. So why did we got there, I guess? In 2022, there was a big turning point, I guess, for the global, VC space. And again, agri-food tech has been affected as much as, I guess, other, verticals. When you look at the numbers, effectively, it's a drop of about 37%, which again is aligned with the 32% of, global VC funding. I guess, good news here is that as market becomes more volatile, effectively, it gets corrected, right? And getting corrected means that capex-intensive, companies effectively are forced to also, work on their profitability path. Companies that were in that trajectory of IPOing, maybe have slowed down their plans to get there. And effectively, a lot of also investors that were very optimistic about, for instance, alternative proteins and plant-based in particular, started to, I guess, correcting, their expectations. And this also has come to at the cost of, very capex-intensive companies being, again, forced either to shut down. This is the case of food delivery and vertical farming in some cases. And also in the case of cereal agriculture, for instance, some companies that have gobbled up along the way, smaller companies, were also forced to some extent to shut down that IP, call it, center, because effectively they were not able to prove to their investors that they could make, a good outcome out of it. And so I guess a good shift really has started. First and foremost, regional dynamics are changing. So when we take food delivery out of the equation of the global funding, you can see that 21 to 2022 actually has grown in most places in the world. And so is the alternative protein landscape. We mapped about 1,000, I think, close to 1,000 companies in 2021, which again, I guess it was a testament of the fact that there was so much hype, behind it. But then, you could start seeing effectively, I guess, investors also looking at other, places like, precision fermentation, cellular agriculture, because they realize that plant-based alone might not be what is going to substitute, the whole animal protein, space as a whole. And so here you see on the graph that effectively in 2021, precision fermentation and cellular agriculture together actually surpassed plant-based in terms of funding. Why? Because the category was going through the classic through of disillusionment, but also is because there were too many players, and so the barriers to entry also have become really high. And this is again a good shift because effectively it cuts through the hype and lets funding go into also solutions that can actually create a systemic change. This is already the correction that we've seen from food delivery and an alternative protein space, but also you can see that all the other, all those innovation blind spots that I was alluding to earlier have also grown in terms of, funding. Because again, are companies that maybe have fundamentals, in place compared to others that effectively kind of ride the wave of the hype. And so what is ahead of us? To some extent, and these are my personal really takes, so take them with a pinch of salt. First off, I think alternative protein is there to stay. The planetary boundaries, I guess, are by now, clear to all of us that would not allow us to effectively keep feeding ourselves only on animal proteins. Cellular agriculture has been making waves, also at the regulatory level, with countries like the US approving it, but also many others following suit. But equally, there are also countries like Italy, where I'm actually from, that has actually banned it, or Romania, right? So again, I'm very optimistic about the advancement that they've been making, but I guess, it will take a lot longer than probably most people think. Synbio is definitely the new black, and I have to say that probably with some hype, but also with some substantial, actually, solutions, in the market. And in places like, the GCC, things like vertical farming are still very relevant because there is no other alternatives. So what we call, climate strategic areas, we will keep on seeing, these type of companies actually flourishing, there. We will start seeing more and more microbiome-based solutions in the market and along with functional foods that effectively eventually might really unlock the full potential of personalization. And again, in some of the categories like food delivery, we're going to keep on seeing effectively further consolidation. And this, of course, and this is really the point that I'm trying, I guess, to make with the presentation, is that over the last 10 years, I've seen that you can accomplish so much more when you actually collaborate with other folks, right? And this is the case of, cellular agriculture in particular. The supply chain is not there yet, right? So we see a lot of companies effectively starting to collaborate even further to really build the building blocks, right, of the supply chain. Also at the regulatory level, I guess, Singapore has been helping to kind of create a role model, right, for other countries. But again, the differences across, the world are very, substantial there. So, and this is also, I guess, helped by the fact that big corporates are realizing that, the new kids on the block are actually making waves, and so we've been very fascinated to see and also to contribute to the development of some of these partnerships, because we do see that, as consumers demand for more options, effectively, this is where, the win-win opportunities really can be harnessed. And last but not least, we see more and more governments actually investing, and we have been lucky enough, I guess, to be part of also the development of some of the strategies with some of these countries, because we see that as much as the private world influence what we actually eat, we do see that a top-down approach from governments is actually what can accelerate the adoption of some of these technologies. And Singapore, I think, is a very interesting, example of how you can push it, push almost the boundaries. But again, I think, it's kind of setting the tone of also what other countries, we're going to follow suit. Thank you very much.